The young and the restless spoiler's shock, Mariah's life had spiraled into a whirlwind of chaos and pain, the weight of her mistakes far heavier than she had ever imagined. She had been running from them for so long, clinging to a fleeting hope that one day everything would magically fall into place. But now, trapped in her own mind, she realized that there was no escaping the consequences of her actions. The mistakes she had made, errors that she couldn't undo, had led her down a path she no longer recognized, one that was dark and empty. The suffocating loneliness had always been a part of her, but it was now more profound than ever. She had pushed away the people she loved, distanced herself from Tessa, the one person who had been there for her, supporting her through every hardship. But now, Tessa had found her own happiness with Daniel, leaving Mariah behind in her own self-destructive haze. The sting of betrayal was too much to bear, and it gnawed at her, deep inside. She had tried to keep it together, tried to push through the pain, but each passing day felt like an unbearable weight. Her grief, anger, and sense of abandonment led her to the one thing that seemed to provide some temporary escape: alcohol. It became her solace, her way of numbing the pain, of temporarily silencing the voices in her head that constantly reminded her of her failures. But the more she drank, the more she lost control of her own life. The alcohol became her crutch, but it wasn't enough to shield her from the emptiness that gnawed at her soul. There was a part of Mariah that still craved connection, that still yearned for the comfort of someone who understood her. But now, that person was gone. Tessa had moved on with her life, leaving Mariah to navigate her own darkness alone. It was a reality that Mariah couldn't face, and the loneliness crushed her. She knew she was spiraling, but she didn't know how to stop. One fateful night, after a particularly grueling day of drowning her pain in liquor, Mariah made a decision. She couldn't live with this overwhelming sense of despair any longer. She had to talk to Tessa. She had to explain, to beg for forgiveness, to somehow make things right. But in her drunken state, her judgment was clouded. She didn't think about the consequences. All that mattered was reaching Tessa, even if it meant driving in the pouring rain, with her mind fogged by alcohol. The roads were slick with rain, and the thunder echoed through the night. Mariah's hands trembled on the wheel, her vision blurred by the tears and alcohol. She couldn't think straight. All she could focus on was getting to Tessa, pleading with her, and maybe, just maybe, she could make it all right. But the storm was more than just the weather outside. Inside, Mariah was a storm in and of herself, a whirlwind of emotion and regret. She couldn't control the car, and she couldn't control her heart. As the car swerved on the wet road, she lost her grip on the wheel, the tires skidding over the slick surface. It all happened in a blur. One moment, she was driving toward Tessa, and the next, the car was careening off the road, tumbling down a steep cliffside. The screeching sound of metal tearing through the night was deafening, and then, silence. The crash was violent, the car crumpling like a tin can, its once pristine shape shattered beyond recognition. The rain kept falling, washing away the remnants of a night that had turned into a nightmare. Mariah lay unconscious, her body broken, her life hanging by a thread. Meanwhile, Tessa had just begun to settle into her life with Daniel. She had tried to move on, but deep down, she never truly let go of Mariah. The memories of their time together haunted her, and she constantly found herself wondering what might have been. But tonight, she would receive a call that would change everything. The phone rang sharply, cutting through the silence of her apartment. It was a police officer, his voice urgent and grim. Tessa's heart stopped as she listened to the words, Mariah had been in a car accident. The officer told her to come to the scene immediately, but Tessa's mind was already reeling, her worst fears coming to life. She rushed to the hospital, her thoughts consumed by the image of Mariah lying in a hospital bed, broken and alone. When she arrived at the crash site, the sight that greeted her was more than she could bear. The car was destroyed, its twisted remains a testament to the violence of the crash. The paramedics were already at the scene, working tirelessly to assess Mariah's condition. Tessa's breath caught in her throat as she approached, her eyes scanning the wreckage. She could barely recognize the car, much less the person who had been inside it. The world around her seemed to blur as she spotted Mariah lying unconscious, her face pale and her body battered. She was a ghost of the person she once was. Tessa's heart shattered as she rushed to her side, her hands trembling as she reached for Mariah's. "Mar," Tessa's voice cracked, but there was no response. She was met with the harsh reality of the situation. Mariah had driven herself into this mess, and now, she was paying the ultimate price. The anger, the hurt, the betrayal, it all came flooding back. But in that moment, as she stared at the woman she still loved, all Tessa could feel was the pain of seeing her like this. It was as if everything they had been through, every moment they had shared, had led them to this point, one where it might be too late to fix anything. The police began asking questions, but Tessa couldn't answer. Her mind was numb. She could only focus on Mariah, her heart aching as she tried to hold on to some shred of hope. But the truth was, Mariah might not survive this. The crash had been catastrophic, and Mariah's chances were slim. As the rain continued to pour, the scene became a blur of flashing lights and muffled voices. Tessa stayed by Mariah's side, willing her to wake up, to say something, anything, that would prove that there was still a chance. But deep down, she knew that the path they had taken had led them to this moment, and there was no turning back. Mariah's story was far from over, but the storm had come for her, and no one knew if she could weather it this time. Mariah's life had always been a roller coaster, a series of ups and downs, marked by moments of happiness and spirals of despair. But what had once been a series of small accidents and misfortunes seemed to have grown into something far more devastating. The latest calamity, the one that had brought Mariah to the brink of death, was the culmination of a pattern that had haunted not just her, but her entire family for generations. A curse, maybe, or a tragic set of choices, but one thing was clear. Mariah had been caught in the same web of self-doubt, pain, and addiction that had ensnared others in her family. The Newman family had seen its share of tragedy, but it seemed that no matter how much love and support they gave, there was always an undercurrent of suffering that refused to be silenced. It was a cruel irony that the very people who had the most love to give, Nick and Sharon, had children whose paths seemed always to be shadowed by darkness. Cassie, Mariah, Faith. All of Nick's daughters, and all of them had struggled in their own ways. For Cassie, the battle had been brief and tragic. She had never had the chance to fight for herself, having passed away too young, her future cut short in a way that left a permanent scar on the hearts of her parents. But Cassie was not the only one. Mariah, too, had been struggling with her own battles, ones that she couldn't escape no matter how hard she tried. It had all started years ago, when the cracks in Mariah's foundation began to show. She was the product of a turbulent upbringing, a life marred by abandonment and constant shifts in her identity. She had struggled with her sense of self, her place in the world, and as those issues piled up, so did the pain. The moment she had let alcohol into her life, it became a powerful force, one that she could neither control nor escape. It wasn't just a crutch. It was a way for her to numb herself to the overwhelming weight of her reality. The emptiness inside her grew, and the alcohol filled it, at least for a time. Tessa had been her anchor. But even Tessa, who had loved Mariah deeply, couldn't stop the inevitable. The distance between them had grown when Tessa found happiness with Daniel, a man who, for all his faults, seemed to offer something Mariah could no longer give her, stability. Tessa's happiness was a bittersweet pill for Mariah to swallow. She understood, but that didn't make it any easier to accept. It left Mariah even more isolated, stuck in her self-destructive patterns with no one to help pull her out. That night, when the storm clouds began to gather and the rain started to pour, Mariah made a decision, one that would push her to the brink. She wasn't thinking clearly, not with her mind clouded by alcohol and the deep, gnawing need to make things right with Tessa. She needed to talk to her, to beg for forgiveness, to explain herself. She couldn't bear the thought of losing Tessa, of letting go of someone who had once been her everything. But the night was unforgiving, and Mariah's decision to drive was born out of a fragile, desperate hope. The rain lashed against her windshield as she sped down the slick roads, her mind racing with thoughts she couldn't control. The tires of her car slid over the wet pavement, and Mariah's hands trembled on the wheel. She was far beyond the point of being able to drive safely. Her mind was a fog of regret, fear, and desperation. Her hands were shaky, her vision blurred, and yet all she could focus on was reaching Tessa, the one person who might still love her, despite everything. But fate had a different plan in store for Mariah. As she struggled to maintain control of the car, her grip slipped. The vehicle swerved violently, the tires screeching against the rain-slicked road. Mariah's heart raced, but there was nothing she could do to stop the inevitable. She lost control completely, the car veering off the road, sliding down the wet embankment, and slamming into a massive rock face. The crash was brutal. Metal crumpled under the immense force of the impact. Glass shattered, and everything went black. Mariah's body was thrown violently within the confines of the car, the pain excruciating as her world spun out of control. The car came to a violent halt, its frame crumpled beyond recognition, its airbags deployed. She was trapped, alone, and unconscious. Her pulse was faint, and the blood from her wounds stained the seat beneath her. Meanwhile, Tessa had just settled into her new life with Daniel. But even in her attempts to move on, Mariah lingered in the back of her mind. She couldn't entirely shake the memories of their time together, the love they had shared, the laughter, the pain, and the years spent learning to love each other. And when the phone rang that night, everything changed. Tessa's world shattered with the words spoken by the officer on the other end of the line. "There's been an accident. Mariah's been in a serious crash. We need you to come down here." Her heart sank, and her mind went into a panic. She rushed to the scene, praying it wasn't as bad as they had made it sound. When she arrived at the crash site, the scene was more horrifying than she had imagined. The car was destroyed, its twisted wreckage scattered across the hillside, smoke rising from the twisted remains of the vehicle. Tessa's heart was in her throat as she pushed through the crowd of onlookers and emergency responders, her eyes desperately searching for Mariah. She spotted her, lying motionless in the wreckage, her face pale and covered in blood. Tessa's breath caught in her chest as she rushed to her side, her hands trembling as she touched Mariah's face, whispering her name. "Mariah, please, wake up. Please." There was no response. Her fingers felt the coldness of Mariah's skin, and she feared the worst. The paramedics worked frantically to stabilize her, but Tessa could see the severity of the situation. Mariah was badly hurt. She might not make it. The rain had turned into a torrential downpour, the storm now reflecting the chaos in Tessa's heart. She stood over Mariah, her tears blending with the rain as they soaked her face. The years of love, pain, and regret washed over her in that moment. Mariah, the woman she had loved, had driven herself into this terrible situation, and now, Tessa was left to pick up the pieces. She had already lost so much, and now, she was about to lose her again. As the paramedics loaded Mariah into the ambulance, Tessa's mind raced. How could this have happened? Was this truly the end for Mariah? Or would there be a chance for redemption, for healing? Tessa clung to the hope that maybe, just maybe, Mariah would pull through. But deep down, Tessa knew that Mariah's story was far from simple. The family had been through too much, and Mariah's road to recovery, if she survived, would be long and painful. The cycle of pain, addiction, and self-destruction seemed unbreakable, but this wasn't the end. It couldn't be. Mariah had a chance to fight, to turn things around. But would she? And if she did, what would be left for her? For all of them? Only time would tell, but as the ambulance drove away, Tessa knew that this story wasn't finished yet. There were more questions to be answered, more battles to be fought, and more heartbreak to come. And the cycle of pain, of both love and loss, would continue, no matter how much they tried to stop it.